They called me a rebel. I only wanted Moses' place.
Have you ever seen someone become angry, not because they were treated badly, but because someone else received the recognition they believed they deserved? Maybe it was a co-worker who felt overlooked after a promotion, a family member who secretly resented another person's success, or even a friend who slowly changed because they believed they were more talented, more qualified, or more deserving. At first, it may look like confidence. It may even look like someone standing up for what is right. But sometimes, something deeper is happening. A hidden battle begins inside the mind. A person starts comparing themselves. They start questioning authority. They start believing they are the one who should be in control. Thousands of years ago, a man named Korah experienced this exact transformation. He was not an outsider. He was not powerless. He was already part of an important community with influence and responsibility. Yet something inside him convinced him that he deserved more. And that belief eventually pushed him into one of the most famous acts of rebellion recorded in the Bible. But what makes Korah's story fascinating is not only what happened, it is the psychology behind why it happened. Why does a person who already has status still crave more? Why does envy sometimes disguise itself as justice? And how can ambition slowly transform into rebellion? That is the hidden psychology behind Korah's rebellion. Before we uncover the deeper lessons from this ancient story, make sure to like this video, subscribe for more psychology and history-based stories, and stay until the end because the final lesson reveals something about human nature that still affects people today. Korah's rebellion is one of the most powerful examples of how resentment, ambition, and envy can influence human behavior. The story comes from the book of Numbers in the Bible, where Korah, a Levite leader, challenges the authority of Moses and Aaron during the Israelites' journey through the wilderness. At first glance, it appears to be a simple story about someone refusing to obey a leader, but when we look deeper, it becomes a study of human psychology. Because rebellion rarely begins with an open attack, it usually begins with an emotion, a feeling of being ignored, a belief that someone else is receiving what you deserve, a thought that says, "Why them and not me?" That question has shaped conflicts throughout human history. Korah's story matters because it shows how dangerous unchecked resentment can become. Many people misunderstand envy. They think envy is simply wanting what someone else has. But psychologists recognize that envy is more complicated. It involves comparison, identity, self-worth, and the way people interpret their position in the world. And sometimes the most dangerous form of envy is the kind that convinces someone they are not being selfish. They are simply correcting an injustice. But was Korah truly fighting for equality? Or was something deeper controlling him? To understand that, we have to go back to where the rebellion began. To understand Korah's rebellion, we first need to understand the world around him. The Israelites had escaped slavery in Egypt under the leadership of Moses. After their freedom, they entered a difficult journey through the wilderness. This was not an easy period. There were challenges, uncertainty, fear, and constant questions about the future. In stressful environments, human emotions become stronger. Psychologists have found that when people experience uncertainty, they often search for someone to blame or someone to challenge. During this time, Moses held the highest leadership role. Aaron served as the high priest, and Korah belonged to the tribe of Levi, a group chosen for religious duties. Korah was not insignificant. He had status, he had responsibility, he had access, but he wanted something beyond what he already had. The rebellion began when Korah joined with other leaders and confronted Moses and Aaron. Their argument was essentially, why should you place yourselves above everyone else? On the surface, this sounds like a reasonable question. After all, questioning leadership is not always wrong. Healthy societies need people who can challenge bad decisions. But the psychology becomes interesting when we examine the motivation behind the challenge. Was Korah seeking improvement, or was he seeking position? This is where envy becomes dangerous. Research in psychology shows that social comparison plays a major role in human behavior. People naturally compare themselves with others. We compare success. We compare recognition. We compare influence. And when someone believes another person's success proves their own failure, resentment can grow. Korah's problem was not simply that Moses had authority. The deeper issue was that Moses' authority reminded Korah of what he wanted. The human mind often struggles when another person's success feels like a personal loss. Instead of thinking, that person has something valuable, the mind begins saying, that person having something means I have less. This is called relative deprivation. It is the feeling that you are being unfairly denied something, even when your actual situation may not be bad. A person can have influence and still feel powerless. A person can have success and still feel overlooked. A person can be respected and still feel invisible. This is how resentment develops, not overnight, but slowly. A thought becomes a belief becomes an identity, and eventually, that identity can influence decisions. Korah's rebellion was not created in a single moment. It was built through comparison, frustration, and a desire for greater recognition. And this leads us to the characteristics that reveal how envy transforms the way people think. One of the strongest signs of resentment is the belief, I deserve more than I am receiving. This feeling can happen to anyone. A person may work hard but feel unnoticed. A talented employee may believe their boss does not appreciate them. A family member may feel another sibling receives more attention. The danger is not the feeling itself. Everyone experiences disappointment. The danger comes when disappointment becomes a permanent story about unfairness. Korah likely saw himself as someone who deserved greater recognition. Instead of focusing on his own responsibility, his attention shifted toward what someone else had. And once the mind becomes focused on comparison, satisfaction becomes difficult. Because there will always be someone with more influence, more attention, or more success. One of the most powerful psychological patterns in rebellion is convincing yourself that your actions are completely justified. People rarely tell themselves, I am acting out of jealousy. Instead, they create a better explanation. I am protecting what is right. I am exposing the problem. I am fighting for fairness. This does not mean every criticism is wrong. But humans are very skilled at creating explanations that protect their self-image. Korah's challenge against Moses was presented as a concern about leadership. But underneath that argument was a desire for a different position. This is why self-awareness is so important, because the human mind can turn personal ambition into a moral mission. Many rebellions are connected to a desire for control. When people feel powerless, they often attempt to regain control by challenging the person or system they believe is limiting them. Control gives people a sense of security. Without it, uncertainty creates anxiety. Korah lived in a situation where Moses represented authority. And authority can become frustrating when someone believes they should be the one making decisions. The question becomes, why should they lead instead of me? That question has started many conflicts throughout history. Korah did not rebel alone. He gathered supporters. This reveals another important psychological principle. People become more confident in their beliefs when others agree with them. A private frustration can become a movement when surrounded by people who reinforce the same idea. This happens in workplaces, families, communities, even online. A person may have doubts about a belief, but when they find others who share those doubts, the belief becomes stronger. Korah's rebellion grew because resentment became collective. And collective resentment can become powerful, but it can also become dangerous. Because when a group is united by anger, They may stop questioning whether the anger is justified. And that is where the story takes an even deeper turn. The story of Korah is thousands of years old, but the psychology behind it is surprisingly modern, because the same emotions that influenced Korah still appear in everyday life. The battlefield may look different. The wilderness has become the workplace. The community has become social media. The leadership challenge has become personal conflict. But the human emotions remain the same. How envy affects relationships. Envy can quietly damage relationships because it changes the way people see each other. A person who struggles with envy may stop seeing someone else as a friend, family member, or teammate. Instead, they begin seeing them as competition. A friend gets a new opportunity. Instead of feeling happy, the person thinks, "Why did they get it?" A sibling achieves something important. Instead of celebrating, resentment appears. A partner receives praise. Instead of encouragement, insecurity grows. The relationship becomes a scoreboard, and once every interaction becomes a comparison, genuine connection becomes difficult. Korah's mistake was not simply wanting something. Wanting growth is normal. The problem was allowing another person's position to create bitterness inside him. How envy affects family. Family is one of the places where comparison can become especially powerful. Many family conflicts begin with invisible competition. Who receives more attention? Who is more successful? Who is considered the responsible one? Even when nobody says it out loud, people can carry these feelings for years. The dangerous part is that resentment often hides. A person may smile, they may appear supportive, but internally, they are keeping a record of every moment they felt overlooked. Eventually, the emotional pressure builds, and a small disagreement can release years of frustration. How envy appears in work life. The workplace is another environment where Korah's psychology appears. Imagine someone who believes they deserve a promotion. They watch another person receive recognition. At first, they feel disappointed. That is normal. But then the thoughts begin, they are not better than me. They only succeeded because of luck. The system is against me. Sometimes those thoughts may contain truth. Sometimes they may not. The danger is when frustration prevents growth. Instead of asking, "What can I learn?" the person asks, "Who can I blame?" That mindset can prevent progress. How envy shapes society. Throughout history, envy has influenced revolutions, conflicts, and power struggles. Many movements begin because people experience real suffering. But human beings are complicated. Sometimes the desire for justice is mixed with personal ambition. A person can fight against unfairness while also secretly wanting the position they criticize. This is why self-examination matters. The question is not only, is the system wrong? The question is also, what is motivating me? Because even good causes can become corrupted by unhealthy emotions. And that brings us to some surprising facts about envy and rebellion that many people overlook. Surprising facts about envy. Fact 1. Envy is not always about wanting someone's possessions. Many people think envy is about wanting another person's money, success, or position. But psychologists have discovered something deeper. Often, envy is about identity. A person may not actually want what someone else has. They may want what that thing represents. A promotion may represent respect. A title may represent importance. A position may represent being valued. Korah may not have only wanted Moses' role. He may have wanted the recognition and authority connected to it. Fact 2. Successful people can still feel envy. A common assumption is that envy only affects people who have less. But even successful people experience it. A wealthy person can envy someone richer. A famous person can envy someone more respected. A leader can envy another leader. Because comparison does not disappear when people succeed. Sometimes success creates even more opportunities for comparison. Fact 3. Envy can disguise itself as confidence. This is one of the most fascinating parts of human psychology. Sometimes the loudest person in the room is not the most confident. Sometimes aggressive ambition is covering insecurity. A person may constantly prove themselves because deep down they fear they are not enough. Korah's challenge was bold, but boldness does not always come from strength. Sometimes it comes from an unresolved inner conflict. Fact 4. People often notice envy in others before themselves. Humans are very good at identifying jealousy in other people, but we often struggle to recognize it inside ourselves. We easily say, "They are jealous," but we rarely ask, "Could I be feeling the same thing?" Self-awareness is one of the hardest psychological skills because it requires honesty, and honesty is often where personal growth begins. Fact 5. Rebellion is usually the final stage, not the first. Most conflicts do not begin with confrontation. They begin with thoughts, a small frustration, a repeated comparison, a private complaint, a conversation with someone who agrees. Eventually, the internal conflict becomes external action. Korah's rebellion was the visible result of an invisible battle happening inside. And this leads to the most important question. What happens when resentment is allowed to control a person? The greatest danger of envy is that it changes perception. It changes the way people see reality. A person controlled by resentment may stop seeing opportunities and only see obstacles. They stop seeing other people's success as inspiration. They see it as an attack. This creates several dangers. When resentment grows, people often focus only on what they lack. They forget what they already have. Korah already had an important role. He already had responsibility. He already had influence. But envy made his existing blessings feel meaningless. This is one of the most destructive effects of comparison. It can make abundance feel like failure. Resentment pushes people away from those around them. A person who constantly compares themselves may become bitter, defensive, or suspicious. They may assume others are against them. Over time, relationships weaken. Strong emotions can influence judgment. When someone feels rejected or overlooked, they may make decisions based on emotion rather than wisdom. They may burn bridges, reject advice, attack people who are not actually their enemies. Perhaps the saddest consequence of envy is that it is never satisfied. Even if a person gets what they wanted, comparison often continues. There is always another person to compete with, another achievement to chase, another reason to feel behind. The solution is not always getting more. Sometimes the solution is changing the way we measure our worth. And that brings us to the most important part of this video. How do we prevent Korah's mistake from happening in our own lives? If Korah's story teaches us anything, it is that the greatest battles are often not outside of us, they are inside us. The question is not, will I ever feel envy? Everyone does. The deeper question is, what will I do when I feel it? The first step is awareness. When you feel frustrated by someone else's success, pause. Ask yourself, what exactly bothers me about this? Is it the achievement, or is it what the achievement represents? Do I want the opportunity, or do I want to feel valued? Understanding the emotion reduces its power. One of the biggest mistakes people make is attaching their identity to their status. They think, if I am not recognized, I do not matter. But your value cannot depend entirely on your title, income, influence, or comparison with others. Positions change, achievements change, people's opinions change. A healthy sense of identity creates emotional stability. Comparison is not always harmful. It can become useful. Instead of thinking, why do they have what I want? Ask, what can I learn from them? A successful person can become a teacher instead of an enemy. A competitor can become an example instead of a threat. Gratitude is not pretending everything is perfect. It is training the mind to notice what is already valuable. People who constantly focus on what they lack often become trapped by dissatisfaction. Gratitude creates balance. It reminds us that someone else's success does not remove our own possibilities. The human mind creates narratives. Sometimes those narratives are accurate. Sometimes they are distorted. You may think, nobody appreciates me, but is that completely true? You may think, they succeeded because life is unfair. But is there another explanation? Growth begins when we become willing to challenge our own assumptions. Humility does not mean thinking less of yourself. It means seeing yourself accurately. A humble person can celebrate another person's success without feeling threatened. They understand. Someone else rising does not mean I am falling, and that may be the biggest lesson from Korah's story. The enemy was never simply Moses. The real battle was inside Korah's own heart. But there is another important distinction we need to explore. Because not every person who challenges authority is rebellious. Sometimes questioning leadership is necessary. So how do we tell the difference? That is where the difference between healthy disagreement and destructive rebellion becomes important. Now that we have explored the psychology behind Korah's rebellion, we need to look at a deeper question. Was Korah wrong simply because he questioned authority, or was there something different about the way he approached it? Because throughout history, some people challenged leaders and created positive change. Others challenged leaders and created destruction. Many people confuse these two things. They confuse courage with pride. They confuse confidence with arrogance. They confuse justice with personal ambition. But the difference often comes down to one thing: the motivation behind the challenge. And that leads us into the comparison between healthy resistance and destructive rebellion. Healthy resistance usually begins with a desire to improve something. A person sees a problem and wants a solution. Destructive rebellion often begins with personal resentment. The focus shifts from, how can this improve, to, how can I take control? Healthy challengers ask questions. They listen. They consider different perspectives. Destructive rebels often attack. They dismiss. They assume they are always right. Healthy resistance involves humility. Destructive rebellion often involves pride. Healthy challengers can admit mistakes. Destructive rebels struggle to accept correction. Healthy leaders build trust. They create conversations. Destructive rebellion often creates division. It turns people against each other. Healthy resistance considers consequences. Destructive rebellion focuses mainly on emotion. Healthy disagreement comes from conviction. Destructive rebellion often comes from wounded ego. And this difference explains why Korah's story remains so powerful. Because the same action can look similar on the outside, but the heart behind it changes everything. The psychology behind Korah's rebellion is not limited to ancient history. Throughout human civilization, we see the same pattern repeat again and again. A person feels overlooked. A person believes they deserve more. A person begins questioning the person above them. And eventually, ambition becomes a battle for control. Let's look at a few examples. One of the clearest biblical examples connected to Korah's story is Absalom, the son of King David. Absalom was not a powerless outsider. He was a prince. He had status. He had influence. But he wanted something greater. He slowly built support among the people, presenting himself as someone who could lead better than his father. The fascinating psychological pattern is that Absalom did not begin with an open attack. He began by building an image. He positioned himself as the person who understood people's problems. This is often how ambition works. It does not always announce itself. Sometimes it grows quietly through influence, comparison, and the desire to be recognized. Like Korah, Absalom's conflict was not only about leadership, it was about identity. He wanted to become the person everyone looked toward. In ancient Rome, the rise of Julius Caesar showed how ambition can reshape history. Caesar was already successful. He was respected. He was powerful. But political competition and personal ambition pushed him toward greater control. The lesson is not simply that ambition is bad. Ambition can create achievements. The danger appears when success becomes impossible to satisfy. When a person reaches one goal and immediately needs another. When enough is never enough. You do not need a throne or battlefield to see Korah's psychology. Imagine a workplace where two employees compete for recognition. One receives a promotion. The other begins spreading negativity. They question the leader. They convince others that the decision was unfair. Sometimes the criticism may be valid, but sometimes the real pain comes from feeling replaced. The conflict becomes less about the decision and more about wounded pride. A famous fictional example is Scar from Scar. Scar already had a place in the royal family, but he believed he deserved more. His envy toward Mufasa was not just about power, it was about comparison. He saw another person's greatness as proof of his own inadequacy. That is one of the most common psychological traps. Believing someone else's success is evidence of your failure. Many historical conflicts began with legitimate concerns. People experienced injustice. They wanted change, but throughout history, some movements were later influenced by individuals who wanted personal power. This reminds us of an important lesson. A cause can be good, but human motives can become complicated. The same person can fight for something meaningful while also struggling with pride and ambition. And that complexity is exactly why Korah's story continues to fascinate people today. Because it is not just a story about rebellion, it is a story about the human heart. Korah's rebellion reveals a powerful truth about human psychology. The greatest conflicts often begin long before they become visible. They begin in thoughts, in comparisons, in feelings of being overlooked. Korah was not destroyed simply because he questioned authority. The deeper issue was that resentment transformed his desire for recognition into rebellion. His story teaches us several lessons. Comparison can create dissatisfaction. Ambition without humility can become dangerous. A person can convince themselves they are fighting for justice while actually fighting for personal recognition. And perhaps the most important lesson, someone else's success does not reduce your value. The healthiest people are not those who never feel envy. They are those who recognize it, understand it, and choose not to be controlled by it. Because the real battle is often not against another person. It is against the unhealthy emotions growing inside ourselves. Now, I want to hear from you. What surprised you most about Korah's rebellion? Do you think Korah was motivated more by ambition, insecurity, or a genuine desire for change? And have you ever seen a situation where someone's desire for recognition turned into conflict? Share your thoughts in the comments. These conversations help us understand not only ancient stories, but also ourselves. If this video helped you see Korah's rebellion from a completely different perspective, make sure to like the video and subscribe for more stories that explore history, psychology, and human behavior. And if you enjoyed this topic, watch our next video where we explore another fascinating question. Why do powerful people sometimes lose everything because of pride? Thank you for watching. Remember, understanding human nature is one of the best ways to understand history. Because history is ultimately the story of people.